everyone, and welcome to today's panel talk. My name is Kajsa. I am one of the Motherhood producers, together with Hattie Harding and Tillie. I am so excited to welcome you all to today's panel talk, Motherhood, and to MESA Festival. I will shortly hand over to our wonderful host, Shelley Maxwell, after I go over some quick housekeeping. So, as part of the Future Innovators of East London Dance Programme, or the Field for short, myself and the cohort of 2020 have worked incredibly hard to bring you MESA Festival. MESA is running events all week long, and if you want to get involved in more events, tickets are still available to buy all this week by heading to Eventbrite. You can also find us on social media. Our Instagram handle is The Field. I would also like to say a big thank you to our partners, Represent Creative, One Dance UK, and the next choreography festival, which is a part of Siobhan Davis Dance. As many other festivals and events, MESA have also had to relocate to a virtual place. So we just want to thank you all for joining us on screen today. If you would have any trouble with your internet and you would be logged off, you can log straight back into the webinar and our administrator will admit you immediately. As we all know by now, technology can be a little bit temperamental. So if there are any technical difficulties, we kindly ask you to bear with us as we try to sort it out. I also want to introduce you to our wonderful BSL interpreters that are joining today's talk, Sophie and Bridget. If you are experiencing any accessibility issues or technical issues, please send MESA Festival, which are the host of this webinar, a message, and we will do our very best to help you. Finally, there will be a Q&A at the end of this talk, so do feel free to post your question in the box that says Ask a Question. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce you to Shelley Maxwell and the Motherhood panel, Helen, Benigson, and Kamee, Abrahamian.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone. My name is Shelley Maxwell and I am a movement director, choreographer, writer and co-director of a production house called Benny Creative House. I'm also your host for this event today. And that's a little bit of tongue-tie behavior that happens quite a lot for young mothers. I'm a mother of a 6-year-old child. And there are many instances between her being 0 and 2 where I literally couldn't even think properly enough to speak. So I think that's very apt as an introduction. I have the pleasure of welcoming our 2 panelists. I'm going to start with Kamee, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of information on both of them. So Kamee grew up in an immigrant suburb of Toronto and was born into an Armenian family displaced from the Swana region. They arrive in the world today as a supreme hyphenate queer feminist caregiver and an interdisciplinary creative writer, curator, performer, producer, and facilitator. They have a BFA/BA in film and political science, an MA in expressive art therapy, and a PhD in community liberation, indigenous and eco psychologies. Welcome, Kamee. I also want to introduce you to Helen Benigson, who's our second panelist. Helen works across video, performance, and installation. Helen's practice is concerned with how images of bodies are perceived within liminal and online spaces. She has exhibited her work in numerous venues, including but not limited to the Hayward Gallery, the Tate Modern, and the Irma Stern Museum in Cape Town. She has recently completed her PhD at Oxford University on the subject of motherhood in relation to the internet and is the winner of the Procreate Mother Art Prize 2020 for her film Jude. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
So if you guys want to take your mute buttons off, we're going to start the conversation. And hopefully as we go through, my pronunciation of words will get a little bit better. So if I'd like to just invite at this time, Helen or Kamee, just to say a few words on who you are as artists and a little bit more about your practice. Kamee?
Sure. My artwork is quite steeped in collaborative practices. I would say it has been for quite some time, and mostly my work is interested in diasporic identities, diasporic futurism, and generally I would call it, like, I always tend to call my work ancestral reclamation work, which I think goes hand in hand with diasporic studies and diasporic identities. And in general, telling, I think, like, telling my own family stories as a way to uplift queer and feminist stories from the Swana region, which is where I'm from. Other than that, I think it's really hard to, reading my bio out loud, I've never heard it out loud like that. And it was kind of nice, actually. I felt like I was walking on a red carpet. But yeah, I think my most recent work is now becoming more collaborative again, but there was definitely a phase right around the time that I became a parent where my work was becoming a little bit more insular. It could be because that's around the time that I started my PhD, which is like, tends to be a very heady endeavor. But I think what ended up happening for me was that because my work was so collaborative, it became really hard to learn how to collaborate, how to be a collaborator as a caregiver with so many caregiving responsibilities. So then it just felt easier for me to just do my own work for a while. And then I think as my little one gets older, less attached, that started to expand a little bit. But I will say that, and definitely my most recent work is really heavily influenced by my me becoming a caregiver, but not in a very explicit way. It's a little bit it's been a little bit more subtle and more in the just around like process and a lot of like nonlinear storytelling and stuff like that, and not being able to formulate proper sentences. I've been leaning into that a little bit, and thinking I'll just make this into a style and it'll be fine. And yeah.
And your little one is 3.5, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Currently. And Helen, I believe that you have 2 children.
I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, both wild.
4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Brilliant. And would you mind telling us just a little bit more about yourself and about your work?
Yes, I was born in London, grew up in London. I studied at the Slade School of Art. I did my MA and BA there, and then a few years later started a PhD at Oxford, which really focused on motherhood, but I tracked my pregnancies and births for the PhD. So I didn't just make work about these states of being, but actually used the PhD to produce this experience. The final part of my PhD was this need to go beyond my own subjectivity and reach to that of another person. I was in quite a vulnerable space, very heavily pregnant, and I just felt this urge where I wasn't working within the institution of Oxford, and I was in this period of supposed maternity leave, this need to reach out to someone else. And that person I formed this relationship with was Jude, who is the subject of the film that I will show an excerpt from a little later. But I think it was this, throughout the research, it was about this reaching out to other people or other mothers, virtually online, in different groups that I was occupying online, but also in real life, with creating this portrait of Jude and their experience of what it had been like to mother.
So it's interesting with the idea of motherhood and what is perceived by it. You know, it it's always a different journey for each person. And just in hearing what you've both said in your kind of introductions to us of who you are. Kamee, you spoke about the need to become more insular. And Helen, I'm hearing that you felt the need to kind of start reaching out to other mothers or other people in the community. And it always strikes me that it's such an individual kind of journey. So I guess my question to both of you is, during your, and I'll make it specific for you, Helen, as you have too, during your first pregnancies, were you working or were you researching or studying? And in that regard, what was your journey like, kind of embracing what was happening to you physically as well as psychologically, as you try to balance between the professional work, art and life, and the changes that were happening to you on a personal level?
I feel like the changes that occurred happened even before I became pregnant. It was this obsessive and anxious tracking of my body. And I used different apps and groups to do this. And that became a kind of obsessive work and research where I recorded and documented every single interaction I had online with these apps, where I would put in different calculations or moods or things that I was experiencing. And then once I did become pregnant with the first baby, that then was translated into a documentation of this pregnancy, again through these apps and how the apps perceive this, what it means to be a female, what it means to be a mother. They're all very normative kind of online platforms. But yeah, I did come across people and spaces that were transgressive of this, and that was also very interesting to me.
And Kamee?
I was so into the what Helen was saying, I forgot the question we were talking. Can you?
Just your experience with regards to as you journeyed into your pregnancy.
Yes. Okay, well, I didn't journey into my pregnancy. It sort of just happened. So it was, I think, like really unplanned, which, yeah, definitely had its qualities. But I would say I continued to work throughout my pregnancy, pretty much up until the last minute, actually until I got into a car accident in my 8th month. And it was like, I felt like it was a bit of a sign for me to start slowing down. So I listened. I listened to that. I didn't listen to anyone else telling me to slow down and stop working. I think I had something to prove to myself, like that I didn't have to just be a mother now or something. And especially culturally, like for me, coming from an Armenian family, there is a whole archetype around that, right? That I was really trying to avoid falling into, because there was this constant sense of doom for me. It was kind of like, well, now you're a mother and you must give up everything, which was really unacceptable for me always, like even like as a young person, as a teenager, I'd be, I was like a very early feminist in that regard, where I'm like, I didn't want to be lumped into the woman box or the girl box, or, and growing up like kind of similarly, the Armenian box, like this is, you can't be queer and Armenian, you can't be that, so all those things. I think it was natural for me to for my pregnancy, or to my transition into becoming like a parent, was one of extreme resistance, and also just noticing like how people come to, just the way that people would like look at me and touch me and make assumptions. Like it just became, I just felt like I was constantly fighting, honestly. Like it was really rough, and it took a really long time for me to really settle in and to feel comfortable in my identity. As a parent, I continued to work. After I was like nursing and like getting on Zoom calls, I was in the middle of producing a play, and a part of me definitely regrets that. I wish I had given myself a little bit more slack and just a little bit more time to rest, in retrospect, for sure. But I also think that it is a part of also who I am. Like my work is a part of who I am, and that's just, I don't think is ever going to change, no matter what giant, chaotic, catastrophic event happens in my life, i.e. having a child. So yeah.
I definitely agree, because I think it's kind of dispelling the pre-existing narratives that have existed about becoming a mother. And for myself as well, I was on stage performing for when I was 8.5 months, and it is that thing of ownership. The community tends to feel that they have a sense of ownership over someone who's pregnant. They become very protective, or they get very defensive. And I think we're just starting to break that, from the idea of this is my body, and this is my person, and this is my journey, and I can then make the choices that I need to make. And like you said, Kamee, sometimes it's very, very difficult, because you're navigating all of that. You're navigating how society perceives everything and how they perceive the individual as well. But you're still striving to maintain your identity, the professional side of your life, while also starting this kind of, I keep using the word journey, because it does feel like it is a journey that doesn't stop with the birth of your child, but it continues as they evolve. You two are evolving. And I know, Helen, that in the film that we're going to see later down, that idea about who kind of makes those decisions with regards to what is meant for a woman's journey, or identity with regards to gender and non-conforming. We can see that through Jude's story that we'll later be told of when we watch it with you. But can you relate to anything with regards to Kamee's journey, and kind of the little bits that I've also commented on with regards to, for you, in your professional versus personal?
Well, I also did a performance when I was pregnant, where I was in a birthing pool, and then I got out and really kind of quite violently sang lyrics that I had written against the backdrop of one of my films. And I think it was this really quite terrifying moment of performing pregnant in front of other people. And it got me to think about what the birthing room as a space of performance means, when the person giving birth is in this room. And even if it's ostensibly this kind of idea of natural, whatever that is, and there's probably no such thing as, this idea of the natural birth, the performing person in the center of all of this is the person giving birth, and the kind of external paraphernalia, the doctors, the nurses, the midwives, the phones in the room,
the props.
Yeah, the props. So I find that really interesting. And also, what you said about touch when you were pregnant, and it makes me think about the lack of touch that people are experiencing now during lockdown, and how pregnancy is going to be so severely altered for people who are pregnant now and in that journey. And I feel like, for me, lockdown just amplified everything I had researched, and my experiences of parenthood just became totally and utterly amplified and exaggerated during that time of lockdown. And care in this setting that we're living through now in different parts of the world. I think we're all going through something similar, where we're using the internet as a way of kind of leaving these intimate places of home to try and reach beyond where we are, because it's quite claustrophobic and exhausting, and it's our only means of accessing others.
Can I just mention something that you wrote on your website? It was part of your PhD research. So on your website you wrote, I identify motherhood in a digital networked age as an entangled condition where the push and pull between online and offline space is amplified, where the mothering body is particularly tied to others, and where a continual disruption of agency and articulacy is at play. The project organizes a new configuration of performed maternality, asking what constitutes maternal voice and how this can be spoken but also heard within a matrix of motherhood that is tongue-tied, umbilically tied, screen-tied, internet connected, continuously switched on and charged, I must say that I found that really fascinating, the way that you put it, because it is quite a different time. And you spoke about having a mobile phone in your hand as an extension of yourself. And in the time of the matrix of what being maternal is, where does that fit in?
Well, for me, it's this constant, thing in my hand that's both an escape route away from what it means to be a mother, and a means in, a way of using, a way of gaining information into this thing that we know nothing about when we start the process. But at the same time, it's this divider between us and the thing we're caring for.
I think the internet was probably the least helpful tool for me when I was pregnant, because I was just like Googling everything, and I was, and I had one friend who was constantly encouraging me to turn away from not just like the information I was reading online and whatever, but also just like mainstream info, even just like the stuff, typical, medical advice was just like, your body knows how to do this and you have to trust yourself type thing, which I really appreciated. And that was really helpful for me, I think. And it was like one of the learnings that that I appreciated most about like, having like a birthing body, I suppose. I will say one piece that that is coming up for me is around this, the societal messages that you get, right, as soon as you become pregnant, and then as soon as like you become like a person who has like caregiving responsibilities, are so intense and so dominating. But it's kind of like, it's almost like having a boss who just tells you what to do but doesn't actually help you do anything. That's what it feels like. So it's kind of like, I just kept getting these messages of like, this is how you're supposed to parent. But I'm like, can someone just like hold my baby while I shit or shower? Like that would be really helpful. So it's kind of like, is that vibe of like, there's that societal expectation, but without societal support, right? So it's like this thing of like, oh, it takes a village, but I'm not actually gonna be there for you for like the nitty gritty, like, I'm not going to change the diapers for you. I'm not going to give you like child support or whatever, like, support, stuff like that. So that's what, to me, was really like, that's what politicized, I think, my becoming a parent so intensely, was just like realizing the differences, right? And the politics of care. That was what was kind of standing out for me as well. And then around the piece of like touch and body, I remember I was in a play also when I was pregnant, but early on, and then later on, when I was 7 months, I was in a film called Susanna by Oksana Mirzoyan, which was did a really wonderful, beautiful job that I still haven't seen in other films yet, of like showing a pregnant person that is also liberated and sensual. And it was really interesting because that's part of the story, but then also just being on set with this big belly and like my big bush, like full nude scenes, and like most of the crew was cis men, and then feeling really uncomfortable around me. And I could just have this feeling of like, I could sense this thing of like, you just don't know what to do right now. You're literally facing this like big, loud, brown pregnant body who's like there. I could just sense this thing of like, do you want me to like hold you while you cry, or do you want to fuck me? Like there was that thing happening where like they were just so confused. And that's what the film does. The film does that. The film is very much so like, this is still a person, they don't become this like mother vessel, to birth society or whatever. But yeah, that was some thoughts that were coming up for me.
I mean, it is about the body being political. It is about body politics. And you referred to, Kamee, the birthing body. because in essence, you still do have those people who look at the female entity as a birthing body, and it serves that function within the society. Whereas as females, we're looking at the body in an empowering way, that you are housing a human being and that you're bringing life into the world. And if we go back to, again, different cultures will of course have kind of different ways of dealing with birth and dealing with family, because I'm from the Caribbean and we're very much about the village helping to raise children. So I had my child while I'm in London, and I do have less support, but I know if I was back home, it would have been very different for me. So it does feel slightly alienating at times as you're navigating it on your own. And rightfully so. I think one of you said that we have no idea, we have no clue, and the internet is there to give you certain tidbits of information, and it can be a positive thing, but it can also be a very, very negative thing. And I found for myself, and I can only speak personally, that I just had to figure it out on my own. And we make mistakes and then we learn from them. And for me, I wouldn't change anything looking back, because I've grown in a specific way, and that's relative to her evolution and my evolution as well. But I wonder, Helen, if potentially you could speak about your project, your film project, Jude, which is a short film. And on your site, it says Jude is the portrait of a former Rebbitzin mother and drummer and their exclusion from an Orthodox Jewish community as they come out as non-binary. Could you just give us a little bit more before you share that with us, just on the film and your decision to make it?
So Jude was married to a rabbi, and this rabbi was the rabbi in my synagogue that I belonged to. And Jude was kind of coerced at the time, Judith, coerced into marrying this man at quite a young age. And they had 3 children. And they've subsequently come out as non-binary and left the community and the rabbi, and is living a life of freedom, which is really incredible and a true inspiration. Jude is a drummer, and they have drummed the entire soundtrack of the film. It's a 25-minute film, and it's currently on show at the Procreate Mother Art Prize now, and then it will be shown in November online as part of the UK Jewish Film Festival next month.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. So should we just share, I think, is it a 2-minute kind of excerpt that we have to share?
Yeah, I've got a 2-minute clip which has captions. Thanks to Hattie and Tillie for organising that.
Great. So while we wait on Helen to view that, and Helen, let me know if you're okay or if there are any tech difficulties. Just a reminder for you guys that you can pop questions into the Q&A box, because we'll spend some time at the end answering some of the questions. Lovely, here we go.
So I was completely lost and unsupported in every way.
It'd be nice to know from the beginning.
For me, covering my hair was one of the hardest things I ever did. Putting on a sheitel, a wig. The minute I had to do that, I felt like I lost all my identity. And then I got pregnant after like a month. I remember the first time I got my period after I got married, and I was like, yes, I'm not pregnant. Because I was really ecstatic about it because I didn't want to be pregnant. And then a month later, I didn't get my period, and I was like, oh man, now what? And then I think I remember thinking, shit, that's it, I'm stuck now. That's it, it's my whole life. I'm going to be stuck in this marriage, in this relationship. I'm pregnant. What choice do I have but to just be in it? Yeah, I went through 9 months of pregnancy, which I was felt really rubbish. This morning sickness thing was a morning, night, evening, day, constant feeling nauseous sickness where I didn't really want to do anything, didn't really want to go out. I felt really isolated as I still didn't really have any friends. I think I found the whole idea of pregnancy really hard. It's something that I struggled with all 3 of my pregnancies. I suppose it was another way of losing myself. It was another feminine gender expression and something that I never really identified with. I remember when I gave birth that it was a moment of emotion. I remember crying.
That's the end.
Thank you, Helen. And so that was 2 minutes of what is 25 minutes, correct, Helen?
Yes.
And for us, we were able to actually watch the 25 minutes thanks to Helen's generosity. And I think for me, and I guess Kamee, you can also comment after, you know, in it, Jude speaks about a sense of identity. And for Jude, pregnancy wasn't something that she identified with or could identify with. And I think, again, it comes to that kind of misconception that is portrayed by society, that pregnancy is accepted as normal by all, by the female gender, and that it shouldn't be viewed in any other light than positive. But pregnancy is complex, and it is not something that is viewed in that way by everybody. And, you know, people don't speak about postnatal depression. Well, now it's spoken about a lot more in media, but, you know, before it wasn't. And all the kind of not so nice or negative connotations of pregnancy were kind of hidden and behind the scenes. So for me, what I appreciated about Jude was the absolute honesty. And I think, you know, in it, Jude said about getting married, I did it because that's what you did. And I think a lot of the time people get caught up in, this is what you do, this is what is the norm, and this is therefore what my narrative will be. And I think for the generation that's coming up, it is about breaking the narrative and really capturing your own sense of identity and being brave enough to do that if you can.
I think also, like, I mean, I actually resonated a lot with Jude because that was my journey or my beginning to identify as non-binary happened also shortly after pregnancy for me. It was a bit gradual, and I explored it a lot in my writing, nonsensical writing, of course, because I was not sleeping very well. But definitely, I think my experience of like nursing and like playing this you know, stereotypical or what's the word I'm looking for here? You know, the socialized act of motherhood, and what that what it does to your body and your sense of self and all those things. For me, I think again I rebelled, and I was like, I started to feel uncomfortable when people called me a beautiful woman. I started feeling uncomfortable with my breasts and my chest, and in general, I think that was like, that's why I'm actually really grateful for Sana coming into my life, because I think I don't know if I would have ever like bloomed into like my non-binariness if I hadn't really been pushed to in that sense. You know, it was really a push for me of like really questioning the ways that I've internalized like what is feminine and what is not, and all those things. And it really broke me open as a person. So, and it made me, think a lot about the gendered aspects of pregnancy, but also of just like care, right? The ethics of care, the act of care, the relations of care, how it's traditionally feminized labor, but definitely need not be. Also like societal, like my dissertation looks at how diasporic Swana women and queers, how they negotiate their like ancestral and cultural practices of care in the midst of like settler notions of care and more like independent, or this the bootstrap, like you can do it on your own, go live in your little box, you don't need help, do it on your own vibe. And just thinking about that and how it is a particularly contextual experience, right? That I think you could resist. There's like the micro resistance, right? And particularly in like whatever cultural community you're in, which I'm not trying to, be nostalgic or about like back in the day. Like that's not what I'm referring to. I'm actually just thinking about like how it functions, like how the expectations of you being able to do it on your own as a caregiver have implications on your sense of self as a caregiver, right? So if you aren't doing it well on your own, that means you're failing inside of like a capitalist context for sure. But just some of the pieces around that I like have been sitting with like mostly in my dissertation work, but they come up constantly every day, all the time, right? Because we live inside of capitalism, obviously, but particularly, I live in Canada, so it's it has that similar colonial vibe. But yeah.
Is your PhD practice led or just writing?
It's not. It's a PhD in psych, but I am working with participants. But one of the things that I'm doing in the research is I'm not particularly working with like people who identify as mothers, but people who are in relationships of care, right? Whether that's caring for a child or an elder, or for land, for spirit, for memory. More than human beings in general. So just looking at it from like from a relationship point of view.
So do you interview the participants?
Yeah, I'm doing an arts-based methodology. It's going to be some dialogue and some it's going to be like participatory art making, but also I'm integrating some tasseomancy into the work, which is Armenian. It's not Armenian, sorry. It is like a general Swana practice of coffee cup reading. It's a divination practice. So that's part of the methodology.
So you'll do that bit?
We'll do it together, yeah.
Brilliant. Kamee, you spoke about, for you during your pregnancy, realizing that your identity was going to be non-binary. Mm-hmm. And having that revelation during the pregnancy, whereas I know in watching Jude, I'm not quite sure if we could get that from the excerpt with the 2 minutes, but for Jude, that realization happened later on, after I think maybe the 3rd pregnancy. Is that correct, Helen?
I don't want to speak too much for Jude on Jude's behalf. Obviously, they're not here right now. I think it was I can't really answer that for them, I feel.
Okay. Just pulling from what I remember of watching it, it's again that idea of doing your journey into motherhood. Kamee, you speak about being a caregiver and what that is. And I'm very interested in that idea of motherhood and caregiving, because for me, I view them kind of hand in hand. But for you, Kamee or Helen, do you kind of differentiate between the two?
Did you say motherhood and
caregiving? Being a caregiver.
For me, the ecology of care, I think, is layered and looped on top of what being a parent is in some ways. But I think you can be a parent and not care and kind of disrupt or interrupt that, what that even means. So I think it depends on each specific person and situation. It's hard to,
and do you refer to yourself as mothers? Question to two of you.
I do, but I use the M in brackets because I think it's important to open up what it means to be a mother and not to be this pared down kind of gendered role.
And Kamee?
Yeah, I typically I oscillate, much like my gender and much like my sexuality and literally everything. But I would say I do try to refer to myself as a caregiver, but I do sometimes even just because I think like I am both of both minds in terms of looking at care and the practice and the act of care in an intellectualized way, but also the practice and the act of caring for a child, caring for an elder, caring for land. It's different. There are differences, right? Not just performatively or physically, but also politically, right? They are in different political playing fields. There are connections, I think, but I think that I'm often complaining about like my friends who don't have children or don't have any caregiving responsibilities, how there's just a part of the experiences that we have in the world that are just plain different. And I want to acknowledge that, right? Especially around the fact that caregiving has been traditionally feminized labor for so long, right? And again, does not need to be. Anyone can feed a child, anyone can change a diaper, anyone can hold a crying baby, right? And so I think for me, it's a little bit of, it depends on the context. Also depends on I'm not offended when people call me a mother, that's for sure. And I read a lot of scholarly work on motherhood, and even if it's not incredibly, it doesn't tend to be inclusive in terms of gender. I still do think that the foundation is there, right? Like reading works of feminist motherhood or queer motherhood and stuff like that. Like the basis of it is still there for me, so I'm not too nitpicky about it.
Got you. We have a question from someone, so I'm just going to read it to you guys, and you can answer depending on if you feel oriented to. The person says, I wonder if the panelists might speak to imagining to be a mother, of how motherhood is also a part of the imagination with the points being raised. As someone who has experienced infertility and fertility, much of my emotional and creative labor has been coming to terms with the motherhood I imagined, and then what my lived experiences reveal as time goes on about this imagination. Is that a shared feeling, experience, perspective that resonates? You want me to read that again, or just having a little moment to think about it?
I think I definitely resonate with the idea of, I think in terms of pregnancy and having a baby, you really do imagine what it's going to be like, and then it's never like that. It's that, I think.
And I think again, for lack of a better word, the process of becoming pregnant as well. Everyone has a different journey. And again, I have many friends who had difficulties getting pregnant. They wanted to do planned pregnancy, but couldn't, and had to go with different kind of means and methods. And some were successful and some were unsuccessful. And being there for those that aren't able to get pregnant and to have children, but who want it so badly and so desperately because they envision their lives with an extension of themselves in that way, and trying to comprehend how that can feel, in a way, the devastation of that for that person, because part of their identity has been about going full circle on that journey of what society dictates being a female and a woman to be, and having to come to terms with the fact that for them the circle is not going to be complete in that way, and then having to transition to a different kind of system or belief that you can actually fulfill your circle on this planet without having an extension of self through birthing an individual. So again, I do think it's something that resonates with me, and I think it is something that should be shared a lot more with people in general. Kamee?
I mean, I think it's like, it's really it's an individual experience. Like I think a lot about my initial, I don't know why this is coming up for me, but my initial resistance to people identifying as mothers when they weren't caring for children. I remember initially feeling really resistant to that. And then I had to kind of check, I had to do some like really digging of like why I was resisting that. And then I figured it was because, like what I mentioned before, is like there's an experience of like, caring for children that, and I'm referring to mostly like it's mostly something that happens in queer communities, like queer moms, queer dads, drag moms, stuff like that, which now I have come to it bothered me initially, and now I really see like the value in that, right? Like just especially in queer communities, when maybe some folks are not in touch with their immediate families for let's say various like homophobic reasons, right? And finding community and finding ways to care for each other and mother each other, or mother oneself also through that. I think I'm a little bit more flexible with that term, right? I think when I had Sana as an infant, I was really feeling the difference, and every little interaction, even if a friend was like, do you want to go out for a drink tonight? And I'm just like, no, I can't do that anymore. Like, when are you going to understand that like there was that constant reminder that my life is just not the same anymore, and grieving that. There's a lot around grief. And so I think that's why I was like really like militant about like who gets to identify as mother. But then I was like, this is going a little bit in a turfy territory. So I reeled back, and now I'm like, okay, like actually, what would the world look like if we learn to mother ourselves and mother each other, or care for ourselves and care for each other, right, a little bit better. And that's something I think about a lot in terms of like the term mother it denotes a particular type of gender, and what does that mean, right? Like, so if I identify as non-binary, am I allowed to identify as a mother? Because mother like typically denotes like like a feminine person, let's say, but I also don't think that's necessarily true. Like I also think that it can be a little bit undone, and so on one hand I can see the arguments made for being more strict with terminology and identifiers, and then on the other hand I see the not the benefits, but I see the generative possibilities of being a little bit more fluid and flexible around that.
A little bit more open. Yeah. Someone has a question that kind of goes on that tangent of how do we both acknowledge the patriarchal imposition of rendering the pregnant body as feminized, in brackets, a receptacle, while also actively stepping away from the obligation of a gender binary, in brackets, female, question. So acknowledging that it is indeed an imposition that has been patriarchal with regards to the body as a receptacle, and how do we actively step away from it, that obligation of that gender binary of the female?
think I want to disrupt that question a little bit and say I don't personally believe that patriarchy has imposed production onto feminized bodies. I think that patriarchy has definitely had an impact on everything around that and the processes around that and the politics around that, right? If we look at like the medicalization of birth, for example, or systems of care, like if we look at the systems and the political apparatuses around, let's say, motherhood or caregiving or childbirth, definitely there is an analysis there, like patriarchal mothering, even as an ideology, right? But
Yeah.
I don't necessarily feel like patriarchy forced me to, I don't equate like production to, what's the word? How am I trying to help me out here? I don't necessarily think that, I don't think that patriarchy is like, definitely culturally, I can make an argument, let's say for Armenians, where it's like, oh, like your job as a woman is to have Armenian babies or whatever. For sure, that is a thing, but I don't personally feel, that it is patriarchy that is like forcing us to. Yeah, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question though. It could be that. Also.
I agree. I think that it's that idea of us as a receptacle is broken, and it is, like you said, it's not an imposition by the patriarchy. It's something that in different cultures still exists, and I think it's therefore maybe a reflection on where you are geographically as well, with regards to that part of the question.
But the idea of a woman's body as being a receptacle, yes, that is fucked up and sexist and definitely patriarchal. I guess so now that I'm understanding the question a little bit better. So yes, hearing that for sure, definitely. The idea of a body being a receptacle is like definitely fucked up. But I will say that I think like everybody has different experiences of of that, right? And I think it's a matter of like, figuring out what it means for you in whatever intersecting identities, backgrounds, experiences that you have, right?
There's another question that asks, and it's motherhood with the X for E has been complicated for me further by the climate crisis. Has that impacted the panelists' experiences? And do you have any advice/resources where we can learn more about this aspect of motherhood? I'm loving these questions. Everyone needs to like sit and think about it for a hot minute. Helen, does that bring anything to mind for you with regards to the climate crisis, having 2 children?
Potentially. I think we've all got a role to play. Bringing children into the world is obviously more responsibility. I was looking at ideas around reproflow and reproductive flow, and it was more to do with like scientific reproductive advances, but the use of surrogacy in other countries and the travel to other countries for people to become pregnant, and what that means in terms of bodies traveling long distances and body matter traveling, what that could do to potentially think about that.
Very good idea. I actually never thought about that before. I'm worried that we have 5 minutes left. There is one more question, so I'm gonna throw it out to you guys as the last question before we kind of do a wrap up. And it says, it was mentioned briefly, motherhood and caregiving as a performance. How does seeing that as an outward showing role or action affect how you connect intrinsically with your child/children? So motherhood and caregiving as a performance. I know, Helen, that you mentioned when you were pregnant, you were in a birthing pool. How how does seeing that, I guess also, do you see it as an outward showing role or an action? How does that help you to connect intrinsically to your children?
Quite a hard question. I think I see a separation between the work I make as a researcher, an artist, and what I do like in my private life at home. And even though the two are quite intimately connected, or I make work in relation to that, I don't, I keep them quite separate. So actually, I'm probably quite, in inverted commas, normal as a mother. Or do you know what I mean?
I get you. And can I ask, for you, why is it a kind of deliberate separation, given that a lot of what you research is about motherhood? Why do you opt to keep
I'm not an artwork. I make work critically about different things that I've experienced, but the fact that my children, for example, aren't the performance. Yeah. So I see it as quite separate.
And Kamee?
Oof. I'm not sure, but when we talk about like performance and motherhood and caregiving, I automatically think of social media, and I think about like the cleanliness of the aesthetic of motherhood. Like there is a particular aesthetic that I am quite repulsed by, and like that sounds really judgmental, but it's really just where I'm at. Like the way that like the motherhood and caregiving and like children are depicted on social media, to me feel like so far away from the actual truth of motherhood. Like, you know what I mean? And I find that I could use a little bit more of the nitty gritty and of like the tough, it's tough work. It's dirty work. It's like,
I think the dirty and tough on social media portrayed as that, they then become kind of sanitized again.
Sure. Even you mean even like the dirty and tough is sanitized? Is that? Yeah, for sure. Even that is like framed in a particular. I don't see often people just being like just straightforward, and I think so, but that's social media, right? It's always gonna like alter somehow or filter somehow. But I think like there's a particular aesthetic of like, and it might be culturally like local, but like the homeschooling mother who like makes beautiful wreaths and like it's just like everything's just like perfect. Like I just like love being a mother. I'm just like I feel like it makes me feel bad because I don't love it all the time. And I don't, like making art with my kids is like really messy. It's never like something that I could like post on Pinterest after and be like, look at what a productive mother I am. It's, like that shit really pisses me off. And I would like to see less of that because I think it's just like not very honest. And it just like makes people, and it's similar to the social media critique, right? It's also like how bodies are portrayed on social media and making people have, it's similar. And I think it's not individual to caregiving and motherhood, but I find it problematic in a particular way because it feels personal to me,
Absolutely. Well, we are on time, so I just want to say thank you to you both and to everybody that came in today. I am going to hand across so we can have closing words from the organizers of the MESA Festival.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Wow, a huge thank you to our wonderful host Shelley and panelists Helen and Kamee for their time and for this wonderful talk. Thank you also to Bridget and Sophie for your wonderful work. And thank you so much for coming and joining in on this conversation. We'd like to remind you of our second motherhood talk, which is on Thursday, where Shelley will be joined by actress Thea Gajic and producer Grace Okereke. It's happening between 1 to 2 p.m. this Thursday, and tickets are available on Eventbrite. After this talk, you will receive a post-event email with an evaluation, as well as more information about the artists and their work, so you can continue to be connected to this event. We hope that you enjoyed this, and thank you again so much for joining us. Bye, everyone.